Hey, hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Leaders and Friends. I'm thrilled today to be joined by a good friend of mine, Dayna Grayson. I met Dayna. She was a partner at NEA. She's now started her own venture capital firm. Dayna's a UVA grad, Harvard Business School, and has kind of lived the life of an entrepreneur and a venture capitalist. So we're going to have a chance today to really explore really a great kind of broad set of topics around the whole sense of entrepreneurship. I'm tremendously a fan of Dayna. I've seen her in tough situations and good situations, and she knows how to keep her cool, which I always admire. So, Dayna, welcome to Leaders and Friends. I look forward to a great conversation.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, Dayna, just to start, like you've lived a journey of entrepreneurship and venture investing. Like, what started you on that path? Like, why didn't you want to go to work at GE or a good company like that? And and how did you plot that for yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up in the South. My parents were both educators, and I think that gave me a constant sort of ingrained curiosity. They were always, hey, I heard about this. Why don't you go try that? Or, when I went to college, my mom said, why wouldn't you major in engineering, which wasn't really something I was thinking about at the time. So it was always about like pushing the next thing and turning over that next leaf. So, growing up, like most of us, like we didn't know what venture capital was. We didn't really know what entrepreneurship as a field was, right? So when I went into engineering in college, did some work on a startup with a professor there, and that was like my first exposure to it. After college, I went into consulting for a couple of years. Actually, did work with GE Capital as a client. But that was a quick 2 year stint. That was at the beginning of the internet bubble. And then within 2 years, it was at the end of the internet bubble. And, my husband says I always have some weird sixth sense for timing because I left New York in August of 2001, right before 9/11, and joined a company that, despite all the crashes around in the internet world, was growing really well. And they were selling software to nonprofits, a company called Blackbaud. And after 9/11, the unfortunate, silver lining of that event was that people were very generous and that company just had insatiable demand and grew really well for the next 3 years. So I was doing product design, given my engineering background, started on the product side. And through that IPO, I saw, the other side of things, read the S1 and said, this like product thing is really cool, but I'd like to learn the other half of the business. And by the way, this looks like this was a great investment for the investors. So I went back to HBS. Funny story at HBS. I think I've told you this, Jeff. On the first day, they sit you down in your section with 90 people in the stadium seating thing and try to give you some inspirational talk. And they say, look to your left and look to your right. They don't tell you that you're not going to be there in 2 years because that doesn't happen in business school. Everyone graduates. But my section leader did look at me and said, you're sitting in the very seat where Jeff Immelt sat when he was at HBS. And I remember when I first met you in 2018, and you
Yeah,
said, nah, I didn't sit in that seat.
exactly, exactly. They make that shit up,
So,
you know that? Yeah,
yeah, business
yeah,
schools, I was full of false confidence and it was, a great experience. But having been through that, IPO and on the product side was just kind of had my ears open to learning about venture capital. Had the opportunity to go to a venture capital firm. I remember Jamie Goldstein, who's now running Pillar Ventures, called me
hmm,
through a professor one day and hired me to work at Northbridge Venture Partners, which was, we can talk about the world of venture and entrepreneurship in a minute. It was very different, strategy than NEA. And so when I went to NEA, I kind of got the sense that both of these things can be quite different. And venture, in a way, is its own field of entrepreneurship.
right. Was there anybody early that was a particularly influence or a mentor to you?
I think that professor at UVA, his name was Thomas Hutchinson. He has passed away now, but he sort of had this. spirit about him that one, pull everyone into things that wants to work on things and have them learn. And then he really took care of his students, after they graduated and checked in and found out what they were doing next. And ironically, with him too, I learned, I think it was like well into my second or third year, but my favorite teacher from growing up in third grade, her name was Utsi Darby. Turns out it was his cousin. So
Mm.
it was sort of a weird, all in the family, two different states away, like very different. Uh, this was not like right around the corner or anything. It was quite ironic that I met with both of them. So maybe she was the first mentor, but then, uh, Professor Hutchinson was great in college.
How did you make the decision to start your own firm? You're now kind of the founder of Construct Capital. I think you're raising your third fund. Like, what gave you, let's say, the courage or the opportunity to raise your own fund?
Yeah, well, I mentioned I was at this firm in Boston, and Northbridge was very much sort of build companies type of firm. Invested very, very early. We didn't write memos. We were all, let's let a company come in and the founder pitch, and we'll decide right then. And it was very sort of founder first, intuition based investing. NEA called me a few years later, and to be honest with you, I thought I was going to be an inventor for a few years, and I'd probably go back to the product side, the operating side. I toyed with some ideas of starting companies, and so I actually thought about it for a while. I visited NEA in DC. I went to their West Coast office. Actually didn't end up joining them the first time they called, and then Harry Weller called me back about a year and a half later, and all he said was, "How about now?" And so I decided when I joined NEA, I probably wasn't going to be on the product side anymore. Probably was
Right.
not going to start a company because by the time I was going to be an inventor, another 5 or 6 years, I'm going to lose all my skills on that side. But realized that the model at NEA and Northbridge were very different, and
Mhm.
you could be an entrepreneur in venture. And I probably decided at that point that one day maybe I could, fulfill my itch for starting something through this if everything goes well. But you don't know if everything's going to go well at that point. But that's sort of what I said. I'm going to go into venture long term and then decide whether I can start a firm one day. And for me, I didn't want to start. There's a lot of merit to people that start firms, that are young and have like 20 million and they do 25 deals and with 20 million. And then the next fund's 40 and the next fund's 100. At that point, when I, decided to start Construct, or when I thought about starting Construct, this from being involved
Mhm.
at NEA. You can't think about small increments. 20 million. I didn't know what to think about with a $20 million fund. So I said, if I'm going to ever start a fund, it's got to be sizable. So there's two things, two criteria. Number one, I wanted to be sizable ish. It's still our first fund was 140. That's a lot smaller than a lot of firms, but it's more than a small seed fund. And second thing was I wanted to do it with a partner. I didn't want to do it on my own. I want to do it on a partner. I just think like two halves of the brain, keep you out of trouble. And I'd met Rachel Holt early when I moved to DC to join NEA. She had a really crazy ride at Uber, so I was constantly just, you know, for shits and giggles asking her like what's going on today, and getting her to look at a lot of companies with me. And I remember one day in the summer of 2019, I said, "Oh, by the way, one day I've thought about starting a firm." I think she was
So just
like,
let me just interject. Like Rachel
"Yeah,
Holt was one of, let's say, Generation One leader at Uber. She was a direct report to Travis. Probably as much of maybe if you looked at 15 people that were part of the early success of Uber, she would be on that list. So you had her
yes."
as a partner who was kind of a mega operator, let's say, and you were like an amazing investor.
Right. So I saw a couple things. One, I thought that would be a great combo. Secondly, having watched her and heard the stories over the years, put it this way, when we met a lot of LPs, they would look at us and say, "Wow, you two can like eat nails." I think she ate a lot of nails, you know, at Uber and did it quite successfully, probably was crafting her own nails. There was a lot of stuff going on. She was employee, I think 25 or 29, moved to the East Coast, opened a bunch of East Coast markets for them. And so
Hmm.
just the scale that she saw there and um, you know, all the hiring, all the changing, all the, exhilaration of what that is like, then that just sets another bar when you look at companies together. And
Hmm.
that perspective, not to mention she's, incredibly smart, quick study on anything new she looks at. It really turned out to be a great partnership. So,
Let me pick up on that, Dana. Like, what is it? You've been at it now 4 years. Like, what have you learned about each other in terms of building something with somebody who's a great partner?
yeah, I mean, when we started Construct, we did two things. Number one, we're equal partners. Number two, we have no attribution. So we just said in a small firm, if we're going to compete against the big guys, we can't be saying like, this is your deal, that's my deal, or for future partners, as we scale the firm. We don't want junior partners to come in and say, if I don't do something on my own, I'm not going to make it. Quite the opposite. So, given that she had operating, I had investing, we have very different perspectives on things. And, we pitch really well to entrepreneurs too. Like this is a sales game. Venture is a sales game. So we have to sell ourselves as to why, we're two halves of a pie and why that investing expertise and understanding how to meter capital, how to increase valuation over time, how to like bank your process as you raise more capital, which I think is an undervalued skill in venture capital is important, but then also how to hire, how to scale, how to think about models differently. So we both bring different perspectives. And, if you don't want to call your partner when you see something good, you probably don't have the right partner, or bad for that matter. So I think Rachel and I are, first call, we text 24/7 if we're not in the same room. Um, so that it's just been a great partnership.
So I'm an investor in Construct. So, when I get pitched to be an LP or something like that, I always look for an investor's point of view. How did you, and I know you have one, but how do you develop a point of view if you're an investor that can, differentiate you in this sea of other alternative investments?
Yeah, it's a good point. I think a couple things. I think smaller firms, they got to start out with something, right? Like I said, this is a game of entrepreneurship itself. When we first started raising Construct and we were talking to LPs and LPs would tell me, gee, I see 500 pitches a year. And I was like, holy cow. Like, I see maybe 700 companies being started a year. You're telling me that like just as many venture firms are coming through your door? I was like, when did I leave the job? Maybe I should go back. Um, but so I think you do have to have a crafted, angle to start anything new. Dick Kramlich and the
Mhm.
founders of NEA had one when they started NEA way back when, and it was their bi-coastal nature. For
Mhm.
us, Rachel and I had been bonding a lot around, just generally the industrial space, Uber's logistics and operations. We were both in the real world side of entrepreneurship, things that I had started investing in at NEA, and they started out as SaaS. They increasingly became more and more in the manufacturing and industrial world. And we can talk
Mhm.
about how we got there. But really from 2015, 2014 on, everything I was doing was in that related world. And that made me call on Rachel a lot. She was making bikes and scooters in China,
Mhm.
as well as scaling rapid cities in the US for the rides business. So it was a lot of really hairy stuff that we were comparing. So we thought, maybe we'll invest in operationally intense businesses. Nah, that sounds a little hard. Why don't we look at this industrial sector and try to bring our backgrounds together and scratch that and see if there's something there. And that developed organically as we were talking over the years. And I think it was so the funny thing, here's another story, is we started this in January of 2020. And so for the first 6 weeks of 2020, we were traveling like crazy. LPs didn't take meetings unless you were in their office. We would
Right.
go to 3 different cities a day. And then in March, of course, the music stopped. So we were spending a lot of time on Zoom, staring at our pitch deck and in the month of March, checking the markets and saying, yeah, don't call anyone today. Let's wait till tomorrow and see what it looks like. And it was really through that we said, okay, we know what we want to invest in, but
Mm,
it's a little bit of industrial, it's a little bit of manufacturing, a little bit of logistics. It's really, and I think Rachel coined the term, it's really around these foundational industries that have gone off and been way underinvested in the US for good reason, perhaps at the time. You would know more about that,
mm,
certainly in the late 90s. But the bifurcation between the IT sector and the rest of the world and the industrial sector in the US is just incredibly stark, starting
mm,
from really the 90s and beyond. Before that, computerization kind of kept in lockstep. So we said this is a really interesting framing, and it reflects what we've been doing, but it makes it a
mm,
lot more understandable. And it also gives us a sense of what we won't invest in, which I think is really important to
mhm.
have that point of view. And as we've developed that, we looked at, the public markets. They don't have a real industrial sector anymore. They have industrial sectors, yes, but they're not tech sectors, and they
Look, the
should
industrial
be
sector,
industrial
Dana,
tech sector.
in the S&P 500, industrials were 25% even as late as 2000, and it's 9% today or something like that. It's really
That's right. Yeah,
remarkable, So yeah,
right.
exactly right. Yeah.
Right. And there's no, if you look at the industrial tech companies, it's
Yeah.
like way, way smaller, but they perform much, much better, not surprisingly, than
Mm,
the rest of the industrial space. So we said, like, we know this space, we've been investing in this space. Let's test our theory on why it'll continue to grow, what, the other side of the rainbow could look like.
mhm.
And that's what I think it looks like. You have a really robust additive part of the market that is industrial tech. And we can get to AI in a minute, but you're
But
not cannibalizing other sectors.
I think that's a great masterclass in terms of how you develop a point of view and what investors need to have to be successful. Before we get to AI, let me ask you, like what one or two things do you look for in a successful founder? I mean, I know this is, you could write a whole book on this, but like in a nutshell, like what do you see when you're getting a pitch from somebody that you want to take a bet on?
Yeah. I'll say it is sometimes hard to distill things in a pitch, especially over Zoom. You got to spend time with people. You got to understand what they're doing. I'd say the biggest thing in great founders, the thing they have in common that I talk about all the time, and I'd say even by extension, great, probably operators and venture capitalists and everything, is just the clock speed, the pace of iteration, and knowing what to lean into and what to lean away from. I think that ability is just that je ne sais quoi for founders. Now that I think some people are scared of that from an investment side because that means, oh, they're going to burn through a lot of capital or they're going to do crazy things or they're going to pivot. The best founders know how to you know, in other words, I think of like the best founders of like having these boots on and walking through like really deep mud and they want to get out of that mud. They should want to get out of that mud and they should try to find like they want to find the best founders the fastest path back to the shore, the straightest line. And if that
Mhm.
means taking a little bit of a turn here or there to find that fastest path, that's what you're looking for. And you're looking for someone like it's hard, like you're picking your feet up out of the mud over and over and over and over again. And that's really hard to do. So somebody who says like, I need a bunch more money to get to the shore and it's really like right over the horizon, I'm like, red flag, you know? I
Yeah,
see a shore right over there. Why aren't you trying to go that direction?
yeah.
So I look for people that do things really quickly to kind of get to the fastest path between
It's
point A
great,
and point
great
B.
advice. So I'm doing a fireside chat in Houston in like a month, and I was talking to the guy that's going to interview me, and I said, what's on people's minds?" He says, "Well, what's on everybody's mind is artificial intelligence a bubble, or what is?" And I said, "Well, that's kind of a long question, but let me ask you, like how does somebody invest, or where do you invest in artificial intelligence today?"
Well, probably not surprisingly, we really do think AI will have a big impact on industrial sectors. I don't think it is yet. I think we still got a ways to go just in, again, you probably know a lot more about this than I do, just in gathering the data. If you look at these sectors, a lot of them and GE in a lot of ways was way ahead of others, but manufacturing facilities that are just making, light fixtures all day. A lot of them were not even connected, but they have a lot of good data. So you got to
Mm,
get them connected and then get the data and then AI. So I think there's a big opportunity in AI in industrial, but we're not quite there yet, which is good. It could happen next year. In
mhm.
AI, I think it's absolutely something. It's not to be ignored. It is a super cycle in venture. It is a new platform, the way the internet, social, mobile were platforms. The thing that I kind of scratch my head around, though, is that, with each one of those platforms, we keep cannibalizing the one before. And so that's why we get these super cycles and these rises and busts in venture. So the internet, we introduced email and suddenly communication is much better. Then with social, we're knowing exactly what everything, everybody's doing all the time. And we had this mad rush to make gaming. And then in mobile, you've got, great applications and the spoils end up going to the platforms. Yes, you get a Salesforce or you get a Uber. You have some other really big companies that do spawn off, but in general, it goes back to the Microsofts or the Googles and the metas now. And so they're all
100%.
racing
Yeah.
back into that. So I'm looking at, how do we create like new value? Like how do we make the pie bigger? China is investing 24% of their GDP in infrastructure. That's up from 8% in earlier part of the 2000s. We invest 2% of our GDP
Right.
in real infrastructure. Like we just keep focusing on our digital spaces and cannibalizing those. And now we're going to make, AI infrastructure data centers. That's great. It's all back in that pie of digital though.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
how about, Peter
I think,
Thiel has said we've stagnated
right.
in the real world, and he's right. We should have flying cars. We should have, a real vibrant
Right.
infrastructure.
No, I think it's a super insightful point, Dana. Like ERPs, CRM, all that stuff didn't really change GE's world. But if you really could model performance of a jet engine, or if you could design an engine in 2 years instead of 6 years, that's the promise that's out there, that is yet to be had. But the other stuff, I agree with you. Microsoft made all the money. We didn't.
Yeah,
So it's kind of
they
like,
continue to.
and they
Yeah.
continue to. Just one or two more, Dana, like when you think about you and Rachel, you're still young, right? You've raised your third fund. Like, how ambitious are you guys at this point? And like, how do you see the next 10 years for you and Rachel and what you're building at Construct?
Yeah, it's a good question. We have said, and we've told our LPs, and we believe this, I think the small partnership model works really well. I've seen it not at NEA. I think NEA's got the right structure, but I've seen it in the market in general that when you get 10 and 12 people around the table, and I'm sure you could write a book on this, like it's really hard to make a decision,
Mm,
like you need leadership inside a firm to help make decisions. It doesn't mean you don't want a partnership. We probably want 4 or 5 partners at scale in addition to us. We want to stay in that 250 to 350 range.
mm,
We think that's where we can be both boutique and commercial. We can, be like the old feel of a cottage industry and venture, which it's not a cottage industry anymore.
right.
When I started in venture, people thought it was still a cottage industry. It's definitely not anymore. But how do you create that boutique feel, but also run in a commercial structure? How do you recognize that venture is an asset class and you need to do things like see every deal and process things quickly. And then once you're invested, help founders raise that next round of capital and help them add that marginal value to their companies. And so I
Yeah.
think, 250 to 350 is where we want to stay so we can continue to make seed investments, have 2 dozen, maybe 3 a dozen companies in any one fund, have 4 or 5 partners at scale, and just keep it really tight.
Neat. Last question, like what's the one thing they should learn from you? In other words, what's been your differentiation, your guiding star? What's made you so successful in the things you do?
Um, I'd say, the world is a sales job. I've never been a salesperson, but I do sell, and or buy my way into a lot of companies, which is selling ultimately. Even when I went to business school, I just pushed myself. I was an engineer, as a product person. I'm really an introvert. And but I said I've got 2 years at HBS, and this is a time when I can call on anybody, and I'm not selling them anything, and I'm just wanting to maybe help them or talk to them. And so I called, I don't know, a lot of people that would be anyone who'd be willing to talk to me, went to all the networking events. And then I continued that when I got into venture. The best way to learn in venture is to talk to entrepreneurs. You can't,
Yeah.
read about it, you can't write about it, can't research it. I take and still do an insatiable an incredible amount of first meetings. Some may call, I'm sure 90% of them, are actually more than 90% of them, don't go anywhere. But that's kind of like what you have to do, is like just put yourself out there, learn in the field. And our field is entrepreneurs. So you got to just be out there.
So I first, just to wrap up, I met Dana. I'd been at NEA maybe 3 or 6 months, and we were working on a company together, and we got ourselves enmeshed in like a $20 million intellectual property lawsuit. And I'm sitting there saying, shit, this is like what I was trying to get away from. How can I end up back in this mess? And I was just so impressed by like your tough-minded, calm and things like that, even at a young age, I think demonstrates your capabilities. So super proud of you, Dana. I think Construct's off to a great start. I mean, amazing start, and wish you nothing but the best.
Awesome. Well, thank you. It's been fun working with you all these years.
Thanks, Dana. Good luck.